I'm Joita Gupta, and this is The Pulse. The stigma surrounding autism and neurodivergence persists in educational settings. A few lingering beliefs are these. Autistic students struggle to process new information, complete tasks, or break a pattern of thinking, all of which pose difficulties in the traditional classroom setting. Moreover, students with autism are subjected to bullying and social isolation from neurotypical peers. Yet, there are other emerging perspectives on autism and neurodivergence. Increasingly, scholars and activists are contesting these pernicious beliefs and creating spaces for autism justice. The conversation on autism and neurodivergence is then rapidly shifting, straddling rural and urban divides, bridging the gap between the global north and south, and elevating decolonial and indigenous voices, all of which intend to resist the dominant, hegemonic biomedical model. Today, we discuss the desiring of autism and neurodivergence in education. It's time to put your finger on the pulse. Hello and welcome to The Pulse on AMI Audio. I'm Joita Gupta. I'm really excited to dig into an upcoming symposium being held at Queen's University between July 23rd and 25th. The conference the symposium is called Desiring Autism and Neurodivergence. And as I said, it's an in-person, actually it's a hybrid event taking place both in person with some virtual components at Queen's University. And it's part of some broader work that's being done at Queen's University. And to help us discuss the symposium and why it's necessary, I'm joined by a guest that regular listeners to the program might remember. Patty Douglas is the Chair of Student Success and Wellness at Queen's University, as well as an Associate Professor of Disability Studies and the Director of this symposium. Welcome back, Patty. I'm so glad you could join us again.
I'm glad to be here. Good to be back.
Tell me a little bit about the symposium and how it fits into some of the work that you had discussed with us the last time you were on the program.
Right. So I lead the Restoring Autism in Education multimedia story making project. And when we were thinking about how to transition from one phase into the next phase of that project, Jake Pine, who you may also know, said, why don't we write a book and do a symposium? And so we struck a steering committee a couple of years ago, and that steering committee has 9 members from across England, Aotearoa, which is New Zealand, and Canada, including Manitoba and Ontario. And out of that was born the idea for this symposium. And as yourself and some of the listeners may know, I've been doing increasing work around decolonizing disability, in particular autism and neurodivergence, in partnership with Indigenous communities. And this symposium brings that focus to the center, as well as intersectional approaches increasingly to the center. So Black studies approaches and others that are, sexuality, different sort of approaches that are typically marginalized even within some of the critical autism work that's happening.
Now, I'm going to ask you a nitpicky question, but I hope you'll indulge me because I know with academics, it's never unintentional. The language that we use is never unintentional. Why talk about desiring autism? Why not just talk about including or accepting or, embracing? There's something really powerful about the word desiring. Why do you want to talk about desiring autism and neurodivergence?
I think we need to go further than inclusion or embracing or accepting. And I think that autistic and, disabled folks have been saying this for a long time, that there's something that we miss if we don't affirm and desire difference and learn to move with and celebrate as well as support all difference. So it's different than including into. So whenever somebody says the word inclusion, I immediately think inclusion into what? So we don't want to include into the neurotypical world. We want to meet halfway and ask, what are we missing when we are not considering this particular kind of different way of being and thinking? I think we miss a lot. Different perspectives on the world that will help us to live together better and do better in our world together in the times that we face. So that word came out of, lengthy discussions that the steering committee had together. I think it was probably Carla Rice who initially suggested it. And we talked a lot about it. I think there's a beautiful sort of desiring a sensory existence that is valued and validated, that you miss if you use the word inclusion or embracing. We're still at a distance from it then, and we're including into something that doesn't work. So this is to say you not only want to include folks like us, but desire us in the world, and that shifts the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And desire what the people who have traditionally been marginalized or overlooked or been posited as problems that need to be fixed, what those people who have been marginalized can actually bring to education, bring to spaces, and to get us thinking critically about some of the systemic issues that have led to the marginalization of people who are neurodiverse or autistic. Tell me a little bit about the breakdown of the conference. So I'm looking at it about 2.5 to 3 days. It looks really action-packed. What's on tap for those who are attending in person, if they live in Kingston, which I love Kingston, or if you're attending online, what can you expect?
We have both artists and academics coming, as well as practitioners. So we have 3 days. Each day has a different theme. The first day is really dismantling ableism and settler colonialist systems. So we've got, artists and academics, keynotes, as well as panels where authors who will be contributing to our book will be workshopping their ideas. It's a relaxed environment, so it's not a high pressure, performance kind of oriented context. It's about dialogue, conversation, learning together. So that's the first day. The second day is really looking at practice. So both professional practice and how we might shift that in education systems, but also thinking about practice a little bit more in a social sense. So that which we do in the world that creates the world in which we exist. So those are, folks doing research creation like Alex Wexler, some of, my work, and others who look at the arts as a place that we can learn a different practice, a different way to be in the world together that is more affirming and more about belonging rather than inclusion. And the third day starts to shift toward policy a little bit, and we'll wrap up with a roundtable of sorts, but a roundtable that really taps into those people who are present, who have been journeying through the 3 days, where we're going to ask what's next, what wasn't discussed here, what needs to be on the agenda still, what didn't we cover, and how do we look into the future and, action the change, really, really change practice and policy in ways, and those are very complex questions, but change practice and policy in ways that allow for belonging and flourishing for all. Education.
If I have in my day gone to a couple of academic conferences, but let's assume I'd never been to one. I would assume that there would be people who are researchers, and there'd be policy, people, and there might even be discussions about book chapters and journal articles. All of that makes a lot of sense. But I'm intrigued, assuming again that I'd never been to a conference or a symposium of any kind. I am intrigued by the presence of artists and why it was so important for you to put in dialogue artists and creatives and people who are community members with, the academic and scholarly community. What comes about as a result of that synergy?
I think art is both its own practice, but it's also a place that provokes, that makes us feel, that helps us think. And so Vanessa Dion Fletcher is actually, after our traditional opening and the sort of feast we'll have it's a bit of a closed event at that beginning place with just the presenters. After that, I'll do sort of a welcome, and then Vanessa Dion Fletcher, who is an Indigenous visual artist and identifies as neurodivergent, will offer us a provocation to think with. And that's going to carry us through the symposium. The arts bring something that academic work on its own can't. It's a very powerful way to provoke, to feel, to think, to experiment in the best sense of the word, sort of creative experiment, to see what we can change in the actual practice and the way we do things. And so inviting artists into an academic setting, inviting community into that setting as well, using the Indigenous gathering space on the Queen's University campus, all of those things are very intentional to break down the barriers between those different sectors and disciplines. We need to think together, and we need knowledge to be meaningful. So there's lots of value in an academic conference in and of itself, but I'm increasingly interested in working. I'm deeply community based, and all of my projects are community driven. So for me, it brings much more hope and possibility, and many different, I want to use an artistic term, like the palette just has more depth. We see all of the pieces and I mean, this is why we do research. No,
that's really powerful. And one of the things that I really liked, and I say this as I must have been early, maybe in my late teens. No, I must have been about 20. And my first ever academic conference, I'd really wanted to go, but I couldn't afford the admission. And so I was a bit disappointed. I was able to finagle an invite from somebody who did have tickets. But aside from that, I was actually really impressed that it is free of charge. And that means that you're, in a sense, throwing the doors wide open. Who is the target audience for this symposium?
There are many target audiences. So students, and particularly autistic, neurodivergent, and other marginalized students, Indigenous students, who want to come into this world and learn and contribute. Other academics, for sure. So our book will be very academic focused, but we're also building a resource hub that will live online and be open access, so that the learning from the symposium can be shared as broadly as possible. Teachers, educators, policymakers. So we've got a lot of people registered at this point, especially online. And so we're seeing this wide, we want community organizations to be there, school boards to be there, as well as academics. So it's really bringing together those different sectors and disciplines, so multidisciplinary, and it is free of charge. There's, if you would like to donate, you can donate, but you don't have to. And almost everything will be made available and will live in an online hub, as well as the panels being, live streamed. Some of the stuff we're doing outside, we won't be able to have live stream, but we will make it available asynchronously after. So we're thinking about making this as open as possible. And that's really the spirit of how this grant was, it's funded through SHIRC, which is a tri-agency funding body. This is for knowledge mobilization and outreach. as well as the Office for Indigenous Initiatives at Queen's University has contributed to this. The Center for Community Engagement and Social Change has contributed to this. And so it's making it as broadly open as we can.
Terrific. I have not forgotten about the book. You mentioned it a couple of times. I'm hoping you'll come back when we have a little more time left to discuss the book, and when it's available, you'll come back and we can dig into it. Just before you go, could you tell us how we might register if you wanted to come? I know you said you have a lot of people registered, but assuming you can squeeze a few more people in, we've got 10 days left to go. How do people sign up?
Check us out on social media, and you will find a QR code and a link, if depending on how you navigate social media, and you can register online. You are welcome to come and be an online participant. I think there are still a few spots in person left, but you'll be put on a wait list if you want to come in person and there aren't, or reach out to me at Queen's University. Google me, Patty Douglas. And I, in my LinkedIn, I'm Patty Douglas. On Twitter and on Instagram, Restoring Autism socials and on Facebook, the Restoring Autism Project. So check us out there. You'll find all the registration details and or reach out to me. I'm happy to help.
Patty, thank you very much for speaking to me about the symposium. It sounds fantastic, and I hope it goes well.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
That was Patty Douglas discussing the Desiring Autism and Neurodivergence Symposium taking place at Queen's University. But we're not at the end of our program. I'm joined yet again by another member of the steering committee. Claire Johnston is a Red River Métis and settler visual artist based out of Winnipeg or Treaty 1 territory. Claire descends from many generations of people who work intricately with their hands. And I wanted to bring Claire on as someone who offers the artist perspective. And of course, Claire is also a member of the steering committee for the symposium. Claire, hello and welcome to The Pulse. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You're putting on a really intriguing workshop that brings together storytelling and bead making. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So for the symposium, I initially, as a member of the steering committee, I thought, I might present like in a more typical way of presenting at academic symposia, which would be, I might have a presentation with a PowerPoint but I thought really what's most comfortable and aligned with the way that I share and the way that I speak, that being able to share like with physical material objects and have folks at the symposium be able to, like in a very deep sensory way, experience my storytelling, like not only orally, but they also feel it, so I'll be sharing stories about, having descending from multiple generations of neurodivergent people in my family, and sharing that through the ways that we create with our hands. So it'll be a really interactive workshop and sort of storytelling presentation. It's just going to be very relaxed, and it's the way that I'm most comfortable, or like a setting that I'm most comfortable in when I really can have something to do with my hands. And so I wanted to share that with everyone at the symposium.
It sounds fantastic. I really dislike PowerPoint presentations. I know they're very much what's expected, but I'm happy that someone is willing to go off the beaten path. Tell me why it was so important for you in discussing storytelling to bring in this generational perspective and to bring in an Indigenous perspective to the work around, bringing in new perspectives around autism and neurodiversity.
Yeah. So I am Red River Métis through my father and my grandfather, and I am and my mother is a settler from New Brunswick, And so I have, I have both the experience of people that work intricately, like with our hands, skilled labor with our hands on both sides of my family. So settler family and my Indigenous family. So there's a lot of, I'm a late diagnosed autistic person, also have ADHD. And so I have the experience of, my entire family, for the most part, understanding, like, there's just this way of living and doing things that we have that is different from others. But beyond that, I've always experienced quite a lot of shame and embarrassment about who I am. And I've shaped and molded myself since I was a child to be what the outside world expects and demands of me, which often requires that I make myself small and I make my gifts very small. And so, there's lots of talk right now about, oh, there's like everyone is autistic now, or everyone has ADHD now, or that this concept, that it's a new concept. But at least I know in my family that for many, many generations, and particularly on my dad's side of the family, like I live in Winnipeg, and I'm able to, I've never been to the New Brunswick, so I don't know as much about my mom's experience, but at least I know strongly that there's been, 3-4 generations of direct descendants of me being a direct descendant of multiple generations of people that have very unique ways of thinking, have very unique contributions to the world that often look much different than others, and also requires us to spend a lot of time alone. So I have that, I know that, and I'm not, while I was late diagnosed as being autistic and having ADHD, I've always known that our family has a different way of thinking. And I've always been aware that we have special and unique gifts to bring forward. And so what I like to do is really highlight the stories of my ancestors, of my dad, of my grandfather, my grandmother, my great-grandparents. I like to highlight their stories of neurodivergence and the ways that they resisted, the way that they came up with very creative solutions, whilst living through poverty and colonialism. So really what I'll be doing is I'll be sharing stories of how, we've existed as Pitoche Tatum, so people who think differently in the Michif language. That we've always existed and we've always provided like very necessary contributions, including being, like I said, like skilled labor with our hands, being people who know the medicines, being people that, have that really unique knowledge and a different perspective of looking at things. So, so I feel very intensely that intergenerational experience. When I look at my hands and how I work with them, I look at my dad's and it's similar. So, so I'll be sort of presenting on that connection that I have in multiple generations of my family of being different. And that's how I come to love myself more and accept myself more, is knowing that my ancestors were this way and it's a gift, and love and honor those gifts now is part of my healing journey.
And where does beadwork come into this? Your beadwork has been featured in an Indigenous opera, and I think you've got a solo exhibition coming up. But for those of us who haven't seen your work before, talk us through what it actually looks like.
Yeah, so I'm a Red River Métis visual artist, beadwork artist. I mean, I love to create everything, but since I was very young, I was always drawn to beads. And I was always drawn to very small, delicate, colorful things. So Yeah, like my entry into beadwork was when I was younger. My dad would take me to the bead shops in Winnipeg and buy me beads, and he really supported my interest in wanting to create. And so we even signed up for 2 craft sales where I'd sell my little beaded bracelets and necklaces and earrings and that sort of thing. That was like around when I was like about 11 and 12 years old. But there was a big span of my life, kind of where I was disconnected from my father and sort of disconnected from, making like and creating quite a lot. So it wasn't until my young adulthood that I kind of circled back to beads. And, before I didn't have access to learning our traditional Métis beadwork, but in my adulthood I have. So I had the opportunity to learn with my sisters in a beading workshop with our Métis local in Winnipeg. I think it was back in 2021. And right when we learned the Métis 2-needle style of bead embroidery. So you're beading onto a textile and using 2 needles and 2 threads to do that. And right when in that moment, just feeling those stitches and everything about it felt so right to me and it felt amazing. And I knew, like, literally, like that first day when I first learned how to do the flat stitch beadwork in the Métis style, I didn't say it, but in my head I thought, I know I'll do this for the rest of my life. It just felt so good. And
Right. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds
so
amazing.
So then I just, went from there.
You went from there. Claire, I am looking at the clock and my heart is sinking because I have to say adieu to you. We're just about out of time. It sounds like your contribution to the symposium will be absolutely phenomenal. And I wish I had longer to talk to you, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
There goes Claire Johnston, who is part of the steering committee and as well as a visual artist. And you can catch Claire's work as part of the Desiring Autism and Neurodivergence Symposium taking place between July 23rd and 25th at Queen's University. You can attend in person. I think Patricia mentioned you got a couple of spots left there, or you can sign up online. That's all the time we have for today. If you have any feedback, you can write to us at feedback@ami.ca. Find us on Twitter or X @AMI Audio. Use the hashtag PulseAMI. You can also give us a call at 1-866-509-4545. And don't forget to leave permission to play the audio on the program. Jordan Steves is our technical producer for today, along with Marco Flolo. Andy Frank is the manager for AMI Audio, and Ryan Delahanty is the coordinator for AMI Audio Podcasts. And I've been your host, Joyita Gupta. Thanks so much for listening.